Welcome back, everyone, to Pitch the Podium. This is myself, Soumil Arora here. And what can I say? I'm still buzzing from that first Grand Prix that we had back in Austria. It's the first Formula One race after 7 months. And there were so many talking points, so many things to discuss. And to discuss the very same with me, I've got Kunal Shah as well. Firstly, hello, Kunal. And what a race that was. I think that's the only way to summarize. What a brilliant race that was we had at the Red Bull Ring.
I agree. It was a classic Formula One race. We were all buzzing, or we are still buzzing with adrenaline, despite not having the Red Bull, as a drink. And I think Red Bull Ring probably has the same adrenaline-inducing, capabilities as the drink that it's, endorsed by. I think it was a fantastic Formula One race, a brilliant advertisement for Formula One.
And the best part is we come back after such a long break, and many people are saying, okay, Formula One is back. And we know for a fact that the racing may not really be the best in the world in this category. But straight away, first race that we had, and there was drama all along. I mean, we saw so many crashes, some fantastic battles, I must say, in the end as well. But Kunal, if you had to narrow it down to bring out your pitch to podium moment, which one would that be? I think it's a hard question to ask, to be honest.
It is. There were several moments, and to me, my pitch to podium moment was the one moment that actually cost a driver a podium. Okay, and that has to be Alexander Albon, and the Lewis Hamilton clash that happened. But more so, I think Albon really had a brilliant drive. He showed that he was always in the sort of hurry that he needs to be as a Red Bull driver. He played good wingman to Max Verstappen, while Verstappen was still in the race. And, he was very opportunistic, very, very to the point when it came to his overtaking. And it's a real shame that for the second time in the running, Lewis Hamilton actually cost him a podium. And maybe in this case, even a win, I would say. But what's your pitch to podium moment?
I think it's hard to look past that one. I mean, we had so many moments in the race, especially Lando Norris taking the podium. And I was just jumping up on my seat when I saw that really happening. But yeah, I think it's a bit hard to go past that crash between Hamilton and Albon. But in the end, I think even Sergio Perez's result in the end, that was something that really got me very excited. And seeing Racing Point back in such a high position, it's something that's very pleasing to your heart, especially as an Indian motorsport fan, knowing that the core ethos of the team was, and still is, in fact, Force India, and the whole value for money ethos that the team has.
Absolutely. And, to take this post-race review forward, or a review of the Austrian Grand Prix, Soumil and I have almost 8 points to talk, but each of them can be expanded into 3 more. So we will try and keep it to the point, like Alexander Albon did almost through the race. One of the first points we will discuss is, of course, the Hamilton-Albon incident. It's been a controversial incident because should he have been penalized? Was the penalty too harsh? So we will share our views. And in general, we'll talk about Lewis Hamilton's penalties because he had 2 in one day, which is very rare for a Lewis Hamilton, right? And then, pretty much everyone has been discarding the fact that Valtteri Bottas put in a stellar drive. I think he didn't put a single foot wrong right from Q3 of qualifying. And he's built up, a significant gap in the World Championship, right? Then we will talk about reliability and attrition. As we all know, there were 11 finishers in the Grand Prix. And then move on to talk about, how teams were lacking in the basics, literally, when it came to racing after 7 months. And then I think the most popular topic of discussion for Soumil and I is going to be Vettel's spin, okay? And, of course, then Charles Leclerc's, chase to the podium. I think he drove a brilliant race, right? And then celebrate Norris's podium finish. I think it was another very brilliant drive from Lando Norris, especially how he got the fastest lap on the last lap of the race. The one question I would like to discuss is, could Mercedes have, used different strategies at different points in the race? So we'll elaborate on that further. And then, like Soumil said, his second most favorite point, Sergio Perez's drive and the strategy that Racing Point had for him.
Indeed, lots of things to discuss. But firstly, let's get down into that crash. The major incident that pretty much defined the entire race. And to give you a bit of a backdrop for all the viewers who haven't watched the race, which is highly unlikely, to be honest with you. But Albon came back in after the safety car, and he put on the sticker red tires. So those are the soft compound tires, if I'm not mistaken. And he went in there, was clocking in. In fact, he had a pace advantage as well. He only recently overtook Sergio Perez, and he seemed to be quite on the charge. And I think he overtook Sergio Perez after the safety car as well, because apparently Red Bull, they had a bit of a confusion on whether Albon had overtaken Perez before the safety car or not. So I think Red Bull told him to go past, which eventually worked out for them. But what really happened was Albon clearly had the pace advantage and he could have gone a bit more easier, it seems. And that's the opinion of a lot of people, because I think it was 11 laps to the finish. And with the much faster tire compounds and a gap of barely any seconds, Albon could have got it done. But I think that sort of impatience eventually cost him the race somewhere. I mean, it may not directly be Albon's fault, but somewhere down the line, you have got to feel that that is a defining factor in the end.
I have an alternate view to that. I think Albon was very, very smart to pounce onto Lewis just at the very first opportunity, because let's remember, he's up against Lewis Hamilton, who,
Yeah,
while we know
exactly.
is a great attacking driver, has brilliant defense as well. Okay. And then there is the psychological factor that if I sort of hold back when I have half a chance with Lewis, he may never give me even 1/3 of a chance, the next 11 laps. I think Albon was right in going for it. Okay. I think he pulled off a brilliant move as well. All right. The big question to me was, I think, Lewis Hamilton didn't have any malintentions when he sort of gave position up and he was trying to defend to Albon. I think, in my view, the penalty was a little too harsh, and the fact that, we are not treating racing incidents as racing incidents is a bit of a bother to me, right? But we've seen, literally on between the Saturday and Sunday that, the FIS stewards have yet again been inconsistent, like we saw with Lewis's first penalty, which was, driving through the yellow flag and not slowing down yesterday, and how, sort of Red Bull protested and got him penalized just before the start of the race. So I think, the stewards, of course, are under tremendous pressure to get it right each time. And in the end, it was a little 50-50 or maybe 60-40 in my view. And maybe they should have just let it be as a racing incident. Of course, very unfortunate for Alexander Albon. Okay. But that's how it goes in motorsport. And it's unfortunate that it's happened to him the second time in 3 races with the same rival.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if you're young Alex Albon coming into Formula One, for the first couple of races, you kind of look up to the likes of Lewis Hamilton. But you've got to remember, in this sport, someday your idols become your main rivals. And for Alex Albon, that really has been happening over the last couple of races that we've seen. Of course, one incident that comes to mind is, of course, the 2019 Brazilian Grand Prix. But again, the same thing, the penalty. I think, in my opinion, again, it was a bit too harsh because Albon, he clearly had his nose up ahead. But I doubt that there was much that Hamilton could do in that case, because if you're going around the outside of turn 3, which is a fairly tricky place to do a move because it just tightens up on the exit, I don't think that's the smartest move in the world. Again, as you rightly mentioned, he should have pounced, and he did pounce as well, but maybe not the right place to do so, because if you're up against a driver like Lewis Hamilton, who you know for a fact won't back out of a move, it is bound to end badly, and that is exactly what happened. So again, I think I share the same view. The penalty was a bit too harsh, but in the end, what can I say? It just gave us another moment that we have to speak about later on. But let's come back to the winner of this race in particular, and Lewis's teammate. Now, I saw a meme earlier at the end of this race that there's a picture of an airplane, a small airplane, with the Thomas face painted on it. And it's just running away from all the carnage, burning down buildings, and bombs being blasted right behind him. And that is just the perfect illustration of Valtteri Bottas' race today. I mean, he just didn't put a single foot wrong. Underappreciated, of course, because too many incidents happening here and there. But Kunal, what was your take on the Finns' drive? And are we finally seeing Bottas 3.0 again?
We can version him on whatever version we want. Okay, I think Bottas has had a brilliant opening to the World Championship in 2020. I believe right from qualifying Q3 in qualifying, we've seen him deliver flawless performance, which is very typical Valtteri Bottas. To get the edge on Lewis, in Q3 itself, to get pole. Of course, he had a lawnmower moment and so on. But I was pretty impressed with what Valtteri Bottas could do. And like you said, he just ran away with the race while all the mess was happening behind him. So, he was probably in the best position that he could have been to avoid the carnage that, sort of happened, P2 and lower from there. And I'm pretty excited to see him leading the Drivers' Championship. He's 25 points up on Max Verstappen and, more than double the points of Lewis Hamilton, who could probably be 2 of his, biggest rivals when it comes to the title, or his first title in 2020.
Yeah, let's certainly hope so, because what we've seen with Valtteri Bottas over the years, unfortunately, is that he starts off with a big bang. I mean, early on in the early races, he just comes up and puts up performances that make you feel, wow, Valtteri Bottas is the guy to challenge for the championship. Again, 2019 comes to mind as well. But eventually, we've seen his championship challenge fade out around the midway part of the championship, where sort of the inconsistency start to kick in. And again, he rarely puts a foot wrong. When he goes in for a sublime drive, you barely see him make any mistakes as such. But certain times the pace tends to be lacking with Valtteri Bottas. I certainly hope that's not the case because at least over here at the Red Bull Ring, we saw Verstappen was, I think, 3/10 off in terms of the Mercedes. So the Red Bulls, they were there, but not exactly in for a championship fight. At least what it looks like from the first couple of races that we can see. And if Bottas isn't really going to challenge Lewis, I think this championship is going to be a bit tricky. But again, it's a good refreshment to see Valtteri winning this race once again, isn't it?
Yeah, and like you said, he needs to maintain consistency, something that's been a bit of a challenge with regards to his campaign. But one thing that really would have worked in Bottas's favor is the number of protests that Red Bull made against Lewis Hamilton. So, first there was a protest, of course, against Mercedes on Friday for DAS, the dual axis steering. Then on Sunday, just minutes before the race, they had a protest about, Lewis Hamilton not slowing down enough and so on. So, while they were trying to use all the, tools that at their disposal to sort of unstabilize Lewis Hamilton, okay, they were sort of giving Bottas, a bit of a lift by leaving him, out of the limelight, so to say. So, sorry, but in the whole Verstappen-Hamilton fight, you may never know if Bottas is the one who takes the honors away, and I'd love to see that.
Yeah, exactly, and he's ended up being the third horse of sorts, the dark horse, I'm sorry, and he's actually put in quite a stellar result for this particular weekend. Again, consistency is the one thing that really should happen later on, but let's hope for the best with Valtteri Bottas and see what happens. And it's funny you mentioned about the protests and all as well, because Red Bull, normally in the world of sport, you'd kind of think of this as dirty politics. You're using all sorts of methods that you possibly can to shoot down your major championship rival, but not so much in Formula One. I think that's what the sport is all about in the end. You try and use whatever you possibly can to try and get the upper hand.
Absolutely. And what's wrong in that? There's a rule book for a reason. And if you feel that somebody is, sort of on the wrong side of the law and you're pointing it out, asking for a clarification. And, like, for example, had Red Bull not protested against Lewis Hamilton's lack of slowing under the yellow flags, the whole situation of the race could have changed because everyone thought that Lewis was, he was on the right side of the law when technically it was shown that he wasn't on the right side of the law and so on. So, I mean, protesting is a very common way of trying to gain the upper hand psychologically as well as, sporting wise in Formula One. And, like we said at the start of the video, this is classic Formula One back in action. And, we were all grateful that we had such a fantastic race in Austria.
Exactly. And we're still buzzing from that. And actually, one thing that made it quite an exciting race, Kunal, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, is all the attrition that we had. Watching it, although I wasn't really there at that point of time, but it just gave me a good vibe of those early 1980s and 1970s races where we barely had a couple of cars finishing the race. Again, the precise number for this one being 11, but there were quite a few reliability issues, weren't there?
Absolutely. There was, at least one power unit each for Mercedes, Renault and Honda that had a reliability issue. For all the fun we poked at the Ferrari power units for, not having enough output in the qualifying sessions yesterday, they surprisingly had no issues, at least with the power units in the race today. So very interesting times because, there's a second race in Austria. One would have imagined that, given that teams have been racing in Austria for a while and the fact that, they've had issues in the previous seasons as well, they would have probably found their ways around. But this also possibly shows, if teams have rushed their upgrades through on their engines, just to try and get the edge in Austria after the long shutdown. Because, Honda and Mercedes, for example, had a reliability upgrade on their power units for Austria. So Max Verstappen,
the irony.
The irony, right? And Max Verstappen had an issue. Lance Stroll had an issue when it came to the Mercedes power units. And then both the Mercedes cars were literally on the edge. The Mercedes pit crew pit wall was trying to make sure that they get both the cars to the end. And that drama was sort of holding us together, till such time, all the safety car periods came. So 11 finishers, and unfortunately, Nicolas Latifi was 7 seconds points on debut.
I think, again, a good effort by him. Again, sometimes just staying out of trouble can be the secret to success, as we saw last year in the German GP as well, with so many other drivers. But coming back on the reliability issues that you mentioned right there, and one major culprit for that seemed to be the curbs. Now, we've seen time and again back in Austria that the curbs can worry quite a lot of people. I think it was 2018 or 2017 where Lewis Hamilton had a couple of power unit issues as well, just because of the rattling that the curbs can make at the Red Bull ring. And that seemed to catch out quite a few people as well. Now, namely, we saw Kimi Raikkonen had major issues with that. I mean, he lost his front wheel, front right, if I'm not mistaken, and Pierre Gasly as well. Not Pierre Gasly, Danny Kvyat in the other Alpha Tauri losing a wheel too. So those curbs really were relentless, and I think because of that as well, the Mercedes engineers were just begging their drivers, please stay off it. But again, we saw a little bit of a scrap with both of them saying, if the other one can do it, why can't I?
That's correct. And, the curbs were already eased out for the weekend so that their, drivers don't sort of end up damaging their front wings. But ironically, they were still, the curbs were still the Achilles heels for the power units. And I'm not sure what the FIA could still do between now and the next race, and will they flatten out the curbs and so on. But, it's great. It's a great ingredient to the overall spectacle of Formula One that, a simple curve that, might just look so harmless and so important to take while you're on a, flying lap could literally just damage your racing prospects.
Exactly. And that was quite a thing to watch out for in this Austrian GP that we had eventually. And now, one thing that I wrote an article about on Pitch the Podium's website, which you can probably check it out later on in the description, was about rustiness. And we've discussed this quite a bit in our previous videos as well. Now, again, we have to consider the fact that the driving standards weren't really the best in the world. Again, you have to excuse the drivers for that as well, because they haven't really been in Grand Prix conditions since Abu Dhabi back in December, and it's been quite a while for that. But when it comes to the teams as well, Kunal, there were quite a few incidents that were notable. I mean, especially when you look at the unsafe release that happened with McLaren and Racing Point, there is some of the rustiness still involved in the teams as such, you can clearly see.
I mean, absolutely. It's been a while. It's been 7 months since everyone was in a Grand Prix environment. I will not lie. I was in the television studio during the race, and even though I was behind the camera, still churning out all the data, I was still like, oh my God, am I doing it right? So I can only imagine what those guys, in several degrees of, higher degrees of, pressure would be doing. Kimi Raikkonen's front right going off was a bit of a surprise. Like, as were, for example, the Haas team, their brake problems came back in to dog the team, in the race today. So teams were lacking in the basics in a lot of way, I would say. Okay. But hopefully it's still the first race, and with the next 7 races to come, they will sort of bring everything together. The one thing that hasn't changed though between Abu Dhabi and now is Sebastian Vettel's spinning ways. Okay, I was absolutely surprised, much as you were, and I'm sure all our viewers were, to see Sebastian Vettel struggle this much. When it came to trying to battle even the Williams or even the McLaren at that point of time, of course, he was complaining. He had braking instabilities, especially at the rear. And he actually spun maybe a couple of seconds before he actually spun with Carlos Sainz Jr. So I was a little embarrassed. I'm hoping Sebastian was embarrassed as well. But it was a very amateurish drive from him, I would say. And I'll put it this way, that, if Charles could put the Ferrari in a place it couldn't have been, but even Sebastian Vettel did exactly that, like you mentioned, just before the start of the video.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you kind of look at it one way, both the Ferraris were in places that they shouldn't really have been. Now, if you take a look at it at the current perspective, Leclerc put it in P2, where we didn't really expect the Ferrari to be. And for Sebastian Vettel, I think in P10, where we didn't expect the Ferrari to be overall, considering all their historic achievements as such. But again, funny you mentioned Sebastian Vettel in spinning. Now, just take a look at this narrative. Sebastian Vettel, 4-time world champion, has everything to lose, gets sacked by his own team. The pressure is on him. You expect him to take a major break, come back with all the force and fire in the world to show everyone and prove a point basically that he's not done yet. Comes back in first weekend, car is struggling. Okay, maybe you can expect him to put out a miraculous drive in the race. And he does the very same thing that has haunted him for the last 3 years. Of all the mistakes that he could possibly make, it's the spin. And people have been calling him Spinala and whatnot in the end. And it's almost coming out of hand for Sebastian. And the funny thing is, he somewhat blames it on the car as well, because what he said was after the race, and I think that's a very amateurish thing to say for a four-time world champion, was that he felt surprised that it didn't spin more often because the Ferrari car was so hard to handle. Now, what's your take on this, Kunal? And do you think that's something that Sebastian could have avoided, considering all the experience that he has in his bag?
I think he could have avoided it. At the end of the day, we saw Charles with the same car not spinning. Okay, in fact, he drove a stellar race and, to finish second.
Hmm.
Of course, he was aided by Lewis Hamilton's penalty, but he was there to, sort of pick up the
Exactly.
spoils, once Lewis was, penalized there. And in my view, I'll go back a few months, and when Ferrari announced that they weren't going to renew with Sebastian, and then Sebastian revealed a couple of days ago that Ferrari never made him an offer. Everyone thought that Ferrari were disrespecting him and so on, right? But I think the bigger fact that's been disrespecting Sebastian Vettel is his own driving and his own rookie errors. I mean, his spins, we would have thought that he's got
Absolutely.
no pressure in the world, and he's out. He's now going to prove a point to Ferrari, and most importantly to me, Soumil, he's no longer in the drivers' championship fight in 2020. So even that pressure is off his shoulders. So one would have imagined that, he would have raced freely. He would have had an error-free and a clean weekend. But it was exactly the opposite. And in some way, he's sort of proving why Ferrari were forced to not renew his contract. So I don't blame Ferrari one bit.
Yeah.
In their decision. Yes, you could fault them in how they communicated that decision. But I understand why Ferrari think it's high time they moved on from Sebastian Vettel.
Well, again, that's classic Ferrari in the end, isn't it? I mean, they know to sort of cut off their bridges once they're done with a particular driver. I mean, case in point, Fernando Alonso or even Alain Prost, for that matter. And Vettel over here, not any exception as such as well. But we have to come back to Carlos Sainz. Now, you mentioned that Sebastian Vettel spun into Carlos Sainz, who eventually had quite a good drive, and he showed everyone that even though he's impacted by a certain incident, he can still come back in and put quite a stellar and consistent performance. Again, he was overshadowed by his teammate in the end, but it sort of gave everyone a good idea why Ferrari picked him in the first place. But what will he be thinking? Because Ferrari, what's happened to their car? I mean, we saw in preseason testing, people were saying that they're sandbagging quite a bit. They can actually bring out that extra level of performance back in Melbourne. Melbourne, again, didn't really happen. Now, I was listening to Karun Chandok on the Sky F1 show, and he said that the reason behind that could be that Ferrari didn't really interpret the rules correctly. I mean, they got too much of drag in their car. And because they found that out on the testing sessions, they actually intended to try and go back home in the factory and try and prepare things around for Melbourne. But the thing is, the factory shut down because of the pandemic, and naturally they weren't able to work on that. But if that really is an excuse, I don't think that's an excuse of sorts, because even if that was the case, they would have had a very terrible opening couple of rounds, because the package wasn't really going on pretty well. So what's really going on at Ferrari, and how can they recover from something like this, and when they're so far off from the pace?
I think Ferrari have been pretty honest. One of those rare times to say, okay, guys, we're slow. Just bear with us for the first two races. And they're talking of an upgrade package coming in Hungary. And, on a funnier note, even if they brought their 2019 car in Hungary, they might just be quicker than their 2020 car. And, it's unfortunate to see Ferrari in the situation they're in, especially because, they had a really good 2019. And, we all thought that, they would be competing against Mercedes and so on. And, I think one of the things that really comes out, which may or may not be true, is Ferrari are lacking on their power unit side. So everyone's wondering if they were actually cheating, and the settlement that they had with the FIA was to sort of protect the fact that they were cheating and so on, right? So lots of diversions in Ferrari's case, with the way Vettel's issues were handled, with the way their package currently is all over the place and so on. But I think the brightest spark in the Ferrari package right now has to be Charles Leclerc, and the way he's managed to bring that car up in second place. He drove a brilliant last 10, 12 laps to finish where he did. And I think hats off to him for being able to do that, despite knowing the way Sebastian Vettel knew as well, that the Ferrari is a dog of a car that's, not behaving the way they would want it to behave.
Now, my apologies for my language in advance, but it just brings me back to that scene from Rush, that iconic scene when Niki Lauda comes into the pit lane after a lap of Fiorano, comes in, says to his engineers, it's a Ferrari. I mean, the engineer says, you can't say that it's a shit box because it's a Ferrari. But in the end, it really isn't working out for them at this stage. And rather confusing times for them right now with all the car not really working out. And I mean, if you're Carlos Sainz, you're just wondering, what have I got myself into? At least you can enjoy a good season with McLaren this year.
Yeah, yeah. And, Carlos Sainz has probably got dual pressures on him this season because first he has to prove that, hey, I'm a Ferrari driver from 2021. And then he's, of course, seeing the Ferrari struggling. And now we've seen, Lando Norris he actually overshadowed Carlos Sainz throughout the whole.
He did. Really did.
Whether it was the practice sessions or the qualifying and even in the race. And I was really overjoyed to see Lando Norris get onto the podium. I was overjoyed for him to actually, clock the fastest lap of the race on the last lap to make up almost 8/10 on Lewis. So he gets within that 5-second gap to find himself onto the podium. And I never thought that a McLaren podium would come this soon, after their podium last year in Brazil. It's literally 2 podiums in 3 races for McLaren.
Pretty much, yeah. And the funny coincidence is that every time Alex Albon has had a crash with Lewis Hamilton, McLaren have got their own podium in the last year. And coincidentally, it's only happened at a race where McLaren aren't really allowed to go to the podium as well. So they're funny times for them. But again, speaking about Lando Norris, now, over the last couple of weeks, I've been reading a lot of tweets and a lot of articles saying that Lando Norris, is he just another glorified paid driver of sorts? And with this particular performance that he's put in today, I think he's just silenced the critics in a way because he's such a young driver. I mean, it's so easy to forget that he's just pretty much a kid at this stage. Of course, older than myself, but still at a very young and fragile age. And the way he's able to shift gears in one particular race. Now, we saw in the mid part of this race where he actually was falling down quite a bit. He was able to conserve on his fuel and tires. He was able to clock in good, consistent stints and defend from all the fast drivers behind him. But when the need arose, in fact, and when he actually had to turn the switch to 11, and when he had to just go in a very intense, kamikaze mode of sorts, he delivered and he got the podium in the end. Good on him.
Absolutely. And, he didn't rely on Sergio Perez's penalty to sort of get ahead in the standings. He pulled off a brilliant overtaking move. He defended well against Carlos Sainz, various stages of the race. I think in the opening stint of the race, he was battling with Lewis and, the top 3 teams out there. So I think, Lando Norris is a very refreshing talent. And for those who think he's just another paid driver who's overqualified, should actually go back and see his junior driver record. I think he's had a phenomenal career even in junior series, literally winning most within the first season of being there itself. And I think we're going to see a lot of him in Formula One in the time to come, given that he's still extremely young.
Exactly. And well, I'll just sort of loop this around to our next talking point. Now, McLaren are going to go to Mercedes power units for next year. And Mercedes really had a bit of an issue in terms of the power units. Again, all the shakiness and all the reliabilities. But that aside, if you actually look at Mercedes' race as such, they really seem to be having, they didn't really put a foot wrong until the last couple of laps. Now, after the safety car came out for, I think that was Danica Fiat's accident, there were conflicting opinions. The likes of Alex Albon and the Red Bull camp, they decided that they should actually go in for a pit stop and put some fresh rubber on. Mercedes, on the other hand, they were confident that they had enough pace to, sort of manage out the gap and sort of level things out in the end. Of course, what really happened later on, Lewis Hamilton getting the penalty, sort of worked things around against them. But Kunal, the big debate that actually quite a lot of people are asking, and in fact, you, I think, are one of the people who really wants to know the answer to this one, is could Mercedes have done it differently? Should they have actually gone for the pit stops when that safety car came out in the end? Or were they being just a bit too overconfident?
They were being either overconfident or they were just happy to, keep their track position. Of course, that's also crucial, given that they've had issues and maybe they couldn't have turned up their engine modes to go chasing the other drivers. But the fact is that everyone else pitted, and I would have hoped to see them pit at that time. And had they pit, their drivers wouldn't have come under pressures, with other rivals on softer compounds and so on. So maybe that was one, something that Mercedes will go back, look into their data and find out. I've been wanting to do that, but I'll never have access to the data that they have. That's one issue that I thought Mercedes could have handled better. The second one, which was of course something, I've discussed, with my colleagues here at VIA Sport, was, could Mercedes have swapped Hamilton and Bottas and gotten Hamilton to sort of finish 4.5 seconds ahead of Bottas, okay? And this would have meant that Mercedes could have kept their 1-2. Hamilton would have been second as he would have been so. And then this could have probably, given them the edge in the Constructors' Championship, while still have kept Hamilton in the hunt in the Drivers' Championship as well. Of course, it's very easy to discuss this in theory, but I'm assuming that when the team was already facing the issues that they were facing, and all the stuff that they were trying to fight just to get to the finish, they realized that let's just take it as it comes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when the penalty got announced later on, and that's when Lando Norris switched the gear up, I think it was a bit too late for Mercedes to do something like that. Again, it could have been something that could work out in their favor, but it would have just been a bit too haphazard. I mean, considering that it was around lap 69 or something like that, and executing a swap, even convincing Valtteri Bottas, was in the lead of the race, that, okay, you have to let Lewis pass. He's had haunted memories of James coming out of the pit wall and saying, Valtteri, you have to let Lewis pass. And although he would have understood the actual implications of that later on, and of course, he's a very smart and well understood Finn. He really knows what's going on. But when you're in that pressure situation in the race, you don't want to be hearing anything at all, do you?
Yeah, that's true. And, we still heard Valtteri is James. And I'm sure for that microsecond, all of us are like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Is this another team order and so on? But, I wonder, and I know that Toto Wolff has said no to this answer, but, he has to position and posture the Mercedes competitiveness here, right? And I think the Mercedes pit wall actually went and told Bottas to do a chassis 2-1 setting at some point, and he said it's an urgent setting. And I wonder if this was down to a multi-21 kind of setting, saying, Bottas, Valtteri, don't worry, you're ahead. You've driven a brilliant race, so you're going to finish ahead, and just don't take the curbs like you've been taking all along. So I don't know if this was a wheeled message. We'll never know. But interesting if Mercedes was actually trying to control the race in this way, because by technically not giving Lewis a different set of tires as they wanted, and by not letting him use different engine modes, they were sort of anyway controlling the race. And I think that's fair, trying to give equal tools to both their drivers. But it's going to be very interesting to see how and if Bottas is able to take the battle to Lewis Hamilton in 2020.
Exactly. And if you just come to think of Formula One code words, they've evolved so much with time. I mean, earlier it used to be, okay, Michael, just pass Rubens, and he just said you go pass. And Ferrari coming in saying Fernando is faster than you. And now Ferrari coming up with the likes of Plan F and what Mercedes just did today. It's a funny thing. But actually, Kunal, it just brings us down to a final talking point for today. And I think it's something that you will feel quite happy about, because your old team, Racing Point, again, rechristened, it was Force India back in the day. Well, they ended up having quite a good weekend. Now, we expected them to have so, because in preseason testing, we saw the pink Mercedes set the timing sheets alight. And even coming into qualifying, people expected that they would be quite good in the race, because Lance Stroll, of all people, also got this car in Q3. So there were high expectations. Again, sadly, not really working out for Lance in the end with all the reliability issues that he faced. But Sergio Perez, even after that penalty, I think he got quite a good result in the end.
I think so. And, I think Racing Point were just too overjoyed at certain points in the race. And that's probably cost them some nerves. I think that unsafe release that they had, while I think it was with Lando Norris and Sergio Perez, that could have definitely been avoided, right? And then, of course, the speeding in the pit lane of, very, very basic, very, like we questioned at the start of the, at the start of the video, that were teams really lacking in basic preparations in Austria. And maybe this was one of those times, where you realize that you're having a great race, but you suddenly go over limit on the pit lane speed limiter, and you have an unsafe release and so on. I think Racing Point would be pleased with their performance and their pace, but they shouldn't be pleased with their final result, because in a race where you don't have a Max Verstappen finishing, in a race where you don't have you have both the Ferraris slower than you technically, right? In a race where you've seen that the McLarens don't have the necessary race pace as you do, you should have technically been on the podium with at least one of your cars. And, Checo was almost there. And I really hope to see them, next weekend when we go racing again in Austria. And again, very bold use of strategy. They didn't use the hard tire with Checo, which sort of allowed him to push while still, do his magic with tire management as he did. But overall, they'll just be happy that, they were much quicker than last year.
But also, give them a little bit of a break, Kunal. I think it's the first time in their entire history that they've actually been in such a good position. And it reminds me of a conversation that I had with Mr. Dilbagh Gill. He's the team principal of Team Mahindra Racing, another very well and efficiently run organization. What it reminded me of was back in season 3 of Formula E, when Felix Rosenqvist was leading the Marrakesh Prix. I think they really didn't have an idea about how to lead the race from the top. And that's what Mr. Gill said. He said that we weren't really in that position ever in our entire history. So we didn't really know how to win a race while leading. And Racing Point, now that they have a bit of experience of being in that really good position, maybe they can then use from that experience and try and build upon that and get better results as they come later on.
Well, okay, that's probably one explanation. Although, I believe they've all had sufficient experience on the pit wall and as drivers.
Of course, but
this. So, and in a short season like this, you're not always going to have a Max Verstappen having power unit issues. You're not going to have
exactly.
Lewis Hamilton getting 2 penalties in a day. So what do you do on these days? You make sure you just land up getting the maximum number of points. And I don't think Racing Points maximize the number of points that they could have scored this weekend. But again, it's racing. I think we had a great return to Formula One. I think the only point that I want to mention at the close of this episode is that there were a certain number of drivers who did not kneel at the start of the race, during the national anthem. And I read a lot of tweets, pointing out towards them. And I think we should not judge people because there isn't a baseline. There isn't a baseline when it comes to communicating your stance against racism. It's not to say that you support, you're against racism only if you kneel. You're happy to, express it in your own ways, like a Charles and a Max did. And I don't think it should be upon us to sort of get our political views impacting the lovely sport of Formula One.
Indeed, I think that is one thing that really dampened my weekend a little bit. Just reading all the comments on Twitter before the race, and lots of people actually saying that, oh, you're not taking the knee, so you're actually being racist. No, let's not actually put our sport in such an environment where you actually judge people and drivers based on certain symbols. Again, as you rightly mentioned, Kunal, symbols for other people might be different. Again, it doesn't really necessarily mean that if you're not taking the knee, you are being racist. Different viewpoints, of course, we're all bound to have disagreements. We're human beings after all. But judging based on not taking the knee, I think that's just putting the sport under some unnecessary spotlight that it needs to be put in my opinion.
I agree. And, on that note, guys, thank you so much for joining us in this episode of the Pitch to Podium show. We resume racing in, 5 days' time. It's going to be exciting. Teams will have a lot more data about the Austrian Grand Prix, and it'll be fun to see how they use that data to become faster, to become more efficient. And if the first race in Austria was anything to go by, I'm pretty sure we're going to all enjoy the second race in 7 days' time. Thanks so much for joining me, Soumil. I'm sure we'll have more videos to look forward to. And definitely. I'm going to see you as well as all our viewers pretty soon.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.